Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship where, without realizing it, you always end up giving in to the other person's demands? Perhaps you've been made to feel guilty, ignored, or subtly threatened into doing something you didn't want to do. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Emotional blackmail is a common, yet destructive, tactic that many people face without even realizing it. In this video, we'll uncover the 5 warning signs of emotional blackmail that you should learn to recognize to protect yourself and take control of your relationships. You'll learn how to identify these manipulative tactics and, most importantly, how to respond to them. The goal is simple. Reduce your vulnerability to toxic relationships and foster self-efficacy, giving you the confidence needed to set healthy boundaries. If you've ever felt manipulated, guilty, or emotionally pressured by someone close to you, this video is for you. Stay until the end to discover practical tools that can transform your approach to relationships and help you live with greater emotional security. So, if you're ready to start protecting your well-being, let's get started. One of the most common tactics of emotional blackmail is the use of guilt. Manipulators are experts at making you feel responsible for their emotions, decisions, and even happiness. This tactic works because most of us want to avoid conflict and don't want to hurt those we care about. But how can you recognize when someone is using guilt to manipulate you? Imagine this situation. A friend says, "After all I've done for you, is this how you repay me?" Or a family member comments, "I can't believe you're letting me down like this, especially after everything I've done for you." These phrases are designed to make you feel bad about yourself, pushing you to give in to their demands just to relieve that sense of guilt. The problem with this tactic is that if you don't recognize it in time, it can lead to a behavior cycle where you're always prioritizing others' needs at the expense of your own well-being. Over time, this not only wears down your self-esteem, but also leaves you vulnerable to ongoing manipulation. So, how can you protect yourself from guilt-based emotional blackmail? Here are some practical tips. Recognize the tactic. The first step is to notice when someone is trying to make you feel guilty. Pay attention to your emotions. If you feel a surge of guilt without a clear reason, pause and assess the situation. Remember your boundaries. You are not responsible for other people's emotions. Each person owns their reactions and feelings. If someone tries to make you feel guilty, remind yourself that their emotions are not your burden. Respond assertively. If someone uses guilt to manipulate you, respond firmly and calmly. You can say something like, "I understand how you feel, but this decision is important to me." Or, "I'm sorry that you're upset, but I have to prioritize what's best for me right now." Don't over-explain. A typical response to guilt-based manipulation is over-explaining yourself. Instead of repeatedly explaining your reasons, state your position clearly and stick to your decision. This demonstrates self-efficacy and confidence. Remember, there is nothing wrong with taking care of yourself and protecting your emotional well-being. Identifying and disarming these manipulative tactics will help you build healthier, more balanced relationships. Now that we've covered how guilt can be used as a manipulation tool, let's move on to the next warning sign. using silence as an emotional weapon. The silent treatment is another powerful tactic that manipulators use to exert control. Instead of openly discussing their problems or feelings, they withdraw into a cold and prolonged silence, leaving the other person feeling anxious and guilty. This type of manipulation can be especially confusing and painful, as it leaves you guessing what went wrong and makes you want to earn the other person's attention or affection again. A typical example is when a close friend, partner, or family member suddenly stops responding to your messages or calls after a minor disagreement. You're left wondering what went wrong, going over every detail of the last conversation. This silence makes you question your worth and pushes you to overcompensate, giving more than you should just to restore harmony. But why is silence such an effective form of manipulation? Because it plays on one of our deepest fears, the fear of rejection and abandonment. The manipulator knows that by withdrawing in silence, they're forcing you to work for their approval, giving them control in the relationship. Here are some tips for handling this tactic. Don't take the silence personally. Often, the manipulator's silence reflects their own communication issue, not a sign of your worth. Don't take responsibility for their actions. Confront the situation directly. If someone is giving you the silent treatment, address the issue calmly and directly. You can say something like, "I've noticed you're distant. If something's bothering you, I prefer we talk about it rather than staying silent." Maintain your emotional boundaries. Don't obsess over figuring out why they're silent. If the other person isn't willing to communicate, that's not your responsibility. Focus on your well-being and keep your dignity intact. Recognizing the silent treatment for what it really is, a form of emotional manipulation. Understanding the silent treatment as emotional manipulation allows you to create emotional distance and avoid falling into the trap of constantly trying to satisfy others. Now that we've discussed how silence is used as a weapon, let's move on to a different but equally destructive tactic: broken promises. Manipulators often use false promises as a tool for emotional control, keeping their victims in a continuous cycle of hope and disappointment. These promises are usually designed to create expectations of positive change, but ultimately turn out to be empty words that manipulate people into staying in a relationship that doesn't meet their needs. This leads to promises being unfulfilled and conflicts unresolved, creating a vicious cycle of promises and disappointment that erodes the victim's self-esteem and trust in the manipulator. Typical phrases: "Next time will be different. I'll change. Just give me another chance. Forgive me. This won't happen again." Practical examples: imagine a relationship where a friend or partner repeatedly acts hurtfully, whether by forgetting important commitments or being disrespectful. During each argument, this friend or partner promises to change and make things different, but as time passes, they return to the same behaviors. Another example could be someone who constantly promises to leave behind harmful behaviors, such as lying or manipulative actions, but never follows through. These constant, unfulfilled promises create an environment where the victim feels trapped between wanting change and the reality of continuous disappointment. Emotional consequences: Over time, broken promises cause emotional wear and tear and a loss of trust. The person subjected to this manipulation may start to feel confused and doubt themselves, questioning whether change is truly possible or if they are asking for too much. This dynamic can also lead to anxiety and frustration, as the hope for positive change repeatedly turns into disappointment. Additionally, it can lead to a loss of trust not only in the person making the promises, but in relationships overall. Tips for handling it. Set clear boundaries. It's essential to establish realistic expectations before giving a second chance. Communicate what specific changes you expect to see and in what time frame to avoid falling into an endless cycle of broken promises. Evaluate actions, not words. Learn to focus on actions rather than promises. Observe whether there is real, tangible change in behavior before recommitting. Constant victimization is a frequent tactic used by manipulators to avoid responsibility and manipulate the emotions of others. By repeatedly presenting themselves as victims, these individuals aim to elicit sympathy and divert attention from their own actions or decisions, generating guilt in those around them. By adopting the role of a victim, they prompt others to feel the need to protect them, solve their problems, or even take responsibility for the discomfort they express. This strategy allows the manipulator to influence others without having to take responsibility for their own actions or make changes in their behavior. Common phrases: "I'm always the one who suffers," "No one understands me," "Everyone is against me," "Only I have to go through these things." Practical examples. Imagine a family member who, in any conflict, always portrays themselves as a victim, regardless of the context. If asked to help with household tasks, they respond by saying no one appreciates what they do and that they always have to bear more than others. During a family decision-making discussion, this family member often claims that no one listens to them, that their opinion doesn't count, and that they're being treated unfairly. This behavior not only diverts attention from the real issue, but also creates an atmosphere of guilt among others, who start to wonder if they have been too demanding or insensitive, even if the situation is reasonable and fair. Being constantly exposed to someone who victimizes themselves creates a significant emotional burden on those around them. The people close to the manipulator may begin to feel an undue responsibility for their suffering, causing them to act from guilt rather than reason. This affects both emotional well-being and decision-making clarity, as empathy and sensitivity toward the manipulator cloud objectivity in relationships. In the long run, the constant guilt and need to rescue the supposed victim can lead to anxiety, resentment, and emotional exhaustion for those involved. Always remember your viewpoint and assess the facts objectively, without automatically assuming responsibility for another's distress. It's important not to let the victim's narrative make you feel guilty for situations that aren't your fault. Respond with questions that challenge the narrative. Reply with kind but direct questions, like, "What do you suggest to improve the situation?" Or, "Do you think there's something you could do to resolve it?" These questions not only help break the cycle of victimization, but also return responsibility to the manipulator, encouraging them to reflect rather than blame others. Veiled threats are a commonly used tool by manipulators to coerce others, creating pressure and limiting their freedom of choice. Unlike direct threats, veiled threats are usually subtle and disguised as seemingly harmless or even concerned comments. However, they contain an implicit message suggesting a negative consequence if the other person doesn't act according to the manipulator's expectations. This form of manipulation aims to create an atmosphere of fear or guilt that compels the person to act, not out of their own desire, but to avoid greater discomfort or a negative reaction from the manipulator. Examples of phrases: "If you really love me, you do this for me. I don't know what I'll do if you leave. I don't know how I'd go on without you. Maybe someone else would appreciate what I do." Imagine a relationship in which one partner constantly uses this type of subtle threat to influence the decisions of the other. Each time the other person expresses a personal desire or need, the manipulator uses phrases like, "I don't know what I'd do without you," when discussing taking time alone, or "If you love me, you do this for me," to pressure in situations where the other person disagrees. In this way, the manipulator doesn't need to express a direct threat, but their partner feels compelled to meet their expectations to avoid conflict or the risk of hurting them. Over time, this pattern erodes the trust and autonomy of the manipulated person, who begins to act to appease the other rather than making free decisions. Veiled threats can generate fear and insecurity in the person receiving them. This constant manipulation affects the individual's emotional and personal security, as they begin to question whether their decisions are valid or if they're just there to fulfill the manipulator's demands. The person starts feeling a loss of control over their own life and experiences anxiety due to the fear of the possible consequences the manipulator implies, leading to a decline in self-esteem and freedom of choice. Practical tips for protecting yourself from emotional blackmail. Tip 1. Increase self-awareness. Self-awareness is key to protecting yourself from emotional blackmail. Before responding to a situation that could involve manipulation, take a moment to analyze how you feel. Ask yourself, am I responding from pressure, guilt, or fear? This step helps you recognize if your emotions are being manipulated and enables you to make more conscious decisions instead of reacting impulsively. Regularly practicing self-awareness will help you tune into your emotions, strengthening your ability to identify when someone is trying to take advantage of them. Tip 2. Set firm boundaries. Saying no clearly and without guilt is essential for protecting yourself. When dealing with an emotional blackmailer, establishing personal boundaries is a way to communicate what is acceptable and what is not. You can practice phrases like, "I understand your point of view, but I need to make this decision on my own," or "I appreciate your opinion, but I can't do this right now." Maintaining a firm and respectful stance strengthens your personal space and prevents the manipulator from crossing those boundaries. Tip 3. Develop self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the confidence in your ability to handle difficult situations. Strengthening this skill allows you to confront manipulation attempts with greater confidence and determination. You can work on self-efficacy by identifying past achievements and reminding yourself of your capabilities. The more secure you are in your ability to face challenges, the less vulnerable you will be to emotional manipulation tactics. Tip 4. Maintain emotional distance. Creating a safe space between your emotions and those of the other person helps you evaluate the situation objectively. This involves observing without emotionally engaging in the other person's dramas or demands. You can take a deep breath, go for a walk, or briefly meditate before responding. Maintaining this emotional distance enables you to assess if the situation requires a response, and if so, to do so from a place of calm and clarity. I hope you found these tips helpful. Remember, recognizing and confronting emotional blackmail is essential for maintaining healthy, balanced relationships. Don't let anyone manipulate you or make you feel guilty without reason. You have the power to set boundaries and protect your emotional well-being. So take control and live with greater emotional security. If you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to our channel. We'd love for you to be part of this community and continue learning tools to take care of your emotional well-being. Have you encountered any of these signs in your relationships? Share with us in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experience and how you've managed it. Share this video with friends or family who might benefit from this information. It could be the first step for them to also recognize and confront emotional blackmail in their lives.